Everyone, thanks for being here. Joshua Barndt. I'm the executive director with Parkdale's Neighbourhood Land Trust. We have a nonprofit that we call the Parkdale Neighbourhood Land Trust, which is our community-based and community-governed organization. And we have a charity that's called the Neighbourhood Land Trust. And I work for both. So I am kind of like opposed to presenting without images because I'm a visual thinker. So I like seeing things. And we don't have slides, but we talk to community members a lot, so I print off the images that are useful. So you're getting like the front door presentation, like we're like in the park talking to residents. That's what you're getting today, okay? I'll pass them around. What do you think about that? Yeah? Old school, okay. So today's talk is about acquisitions, of course, for community land trusts. The acquisition process is an essential part of our work. And we probably each approach it differently, both in terms of what we're trying to purchase and for what reason. And for the Parkdale Neighbourhood Land Trust, we have a specific history as to why we decided to buy certain properties, and I think it's important to share the context. So Parkdale is in the west end of Toronto. We're one of the last remaining working class communities in the downtown core. We have a large percentage of new immigrants living in the community. Over 50% of residents are BIPOC. And 90% of residents are renters. As you can imagine, in this particular rental market, that means that a majority of residents are quite concerned about what's happening to land costs, what's happening around development, what's happening to rents. So our community land trust has organized specifically to represent low-income people, renters, moderate-income people, et cetera, in that community who are being impacted by gentrification. In our community, gentrification, we've always associated that with the process of both displacement of low-income residents and locally serving businesses, but also dispossession of community assets. And we've, and anyone who's lived there long enough knows that it's a violent process. It's not like this random thing, you get a new store. The older business owner gets kicked out, loses their business, loses all the investment they put into creating that business. For a new tenant to move into a home often at a higher rent that, someone has lost their housing for that unit to become available. We got started back in 2014. 7 organizations and a bunch of resident groups came together to fight gentrification and to use a land-based strategy to do that. There was analysis that was brought to the community that this was a real estate issue and we needed a real estate solution. Gentrification was a struggle over land. Whoever owned and controlled the land would decide what the use would be, who would benefit from it, and how that land would change over time in the community. And if we wanted to have more control over that as a community and get more equitable outcomes, we'd have to take control. That was our analysis. We got to get control of the land. So we created this community land trust, and in that first year, we spent time just educating the community about what a community land trust was. Going door to door, going to community meetings, talking about the model. Oh, we're here. Boop. Okay. How do we get the full screen? I'm going to keep talking. Bottom right. Okay. Anyways, there was this mass eviction early on in the land trust's experience. 27 tenants got kicked out of a rooming house with 7 days' notice. It was one of the bigger mass evictions that we'd experienced, and it was quite violent. Goons were hired to take off the doors of people's rooms. People's things were thrown out. We had all levels of government, the representatives come and try to stop the eviction. Community members tried to stop the eviction, but the eviction was successful. And everyone was sort of traumatized by the experience. 27 of our neighbors just became homeless in a week in one mass eviction. Great, okay. This is Robert. He was one of the gentlemen who was evicted. This photo I took. I live on this street, and the building is the red brick building in the background. When we talked to the tenants, they said, this is happening all the time. Like, people are being kicked out of these rooming houses like crazy, no one's paying attention. So we were a brand new land trust, and we sort of like knew gentrification was an issue, but we didn't know where to start. Like, where would we start? What type of housing would we start to preserve? So we decided to start with the rooming houses. The mass eviction was kind of like the wake-up call, and hearing from people that this was a bigger issue than we understood was a sign that we need to investigate before we took action. So we hired a planner, and we hired rooming house tenants as community-based researchers, and we went through the community to document all the rooming houses and to see what was going on. We found that there were 198 rooming houses with 2,700 units. It was the largest affordable housing portfolio in the community. There's more private rooming houses units than there were public housing and social housing put together. And there was no concerted public, community, et cetera, strategy to ensure this housing would continue to be available. It's also important to say that the lowest income residents in the community were living in these homes. So if they lost their housing, many of them would become homeless. So we published a report, and one of the recommendations was that the land trust should try to preserve these properties and work with other nonprofits to do the same. The idea was to bring these properties into nonprofit ownership. So, I mean, it's pretty obvious. The market is investing in these properties, trying to upscale them, increase the rents, and as a result, the existing tenants are losing their housing. The rental protections aren't adequate, so that the system allows this to happen. We have an opportunity actually to work with these older owners who are selling their buildings and to plan for succession so that the community can take ownership, improve the buildings, and continue to have affordable housing available to the current and future low-income residents. We thought the land trust would be a good vehicle for this, but we also acknowledged that we wanted other nonprofits, pre-existing nonprofits, to also do this. We quickly encountered some challenges that these owners wanted to sell their properties quickly. They weren't interested in signing deals with us and waiting 8 months for us to find money. They wanted the money in 6 weeks, 12 weeks. Neither us nor our partners had the cash to actually pay for these properties, and the government programs that existed did not support acquisition. So we had just about 20 failed acquisitions in the years following the publishing of this report. So we'd like go and meet residents, a building comes up for sale, we talk to the tenants, we put in an offer, we go to the government, we apply for money, we get denied, we lose the bid, we do it again, and each time, we've lost control. I've lost control. It was disappointing and sad, and I definitely had like a lot of cries because you meet people and their housing's at risk, and you're trying to, make this work. And when we fail, like people sometimes do lose their housing, so it's like really hard. But it also presents a learning opportunity, right? Like we got good at this through the process. Like the failures allowed us to learn how to do this well, and now we consider ourselves experts of acquisition of these types of homes. We help others do this. We also identified that there's a big policy gap, and you might say failure. This is an important form of housing that provides housing for the most vulnerable residents in our community, and there was no policy consideration of them. It also is a public policy opportunity because if we can identify that gap and convince the politicians to do something about it, then we might get something new. So we also saw this as an opportunity for us to contribute to policy development. And after our 18th or 19th fail, we were pretty upset and angry. And we got really angry at our local councillor and the housing department and said, you all talk about these issues. You say that it's important that we're making sure that people have housing, that people aren't thrown on the street, but you're not funding the solutions that are going to allow these people to keep their homes. And you're not funding us to help create those solutions. And so literally, the councillor brought the head of the housing secretariat into a room. We sat with them, and on the spot, they invented a program. They said, we're not going to be able to convince the whole city to do this immediately, but why don't we do a pilot? So the local councillor agreed to put some money that was from a developer. They call it Section 37 in Toronto, but at $1.5 million into a pilot program for the city to test out the feasibility of buying buildings to create affordable housing. Obviously, everyone knew that it was feasible because it's been done many times, but I guess in each political moment, you need to test it again. You know, I don't know. But it was an opportunity for us to do our first project. And so this is a good learning. The councillor just had to write like 4 sentences, and then we had money to buy a building. Right? Like, it was crazy. Like, a member's motion, generally like council members will not oppose each other's motions. We just have to convince them to write those 4 sentences, and then the community can like implement its strategy. Anyways, luckily the council did it, and so it's been successful. So we bought our first building. This is 26 Maynard. It's 15 units. It's a rooming house. In Parkdale, there's a lot of rooming houses that are actually like self-contained units, but they're smaller than the legal size of a unit, so they need a rooming house license, and we call them rooming houses. We bought the building. The existing tenants got to stay. Existing tenants got subsidy, so their rents went down. Now their rents are subsidized. And the building is operated by a supportive housing organization that provides support services as well as administering the subsidies. We signed an agreement with the city that rents will be affordable for 99 years, which is the legal limit. So we've created what we call permanently affordable rental housing. And any unit that becomes available through vacancy is made available to someone in the shelter system who is in need of supportive housing. So it not only protects people from being thrown into homelessness who are our neighbors, but it also creates new supply of housing that is supportive and available to people who are extremely low income. They always talk about supply. It's like, I personally don't care how many units we have in general. It's, can people afford them, right? And are they available to those people? Yeah, so this was like a big win for us. In the next few years, we supported our partners to do other pilot projects. And so within 3 years of the study being published, there had been 5 buildings within 2 blocks in Parkdale that were purchased by nonprofits, 1 by us and 4 by our partners who we supported to do that work. And it was about 150 units in total in like that short period, which is big actually. It's like, it was huge for us. But it was 2020, and there were just so many buildings up for sale, like constantly. They were coming up for sale and selling and coming up for sale. There's so much turnover in this market, so much speculation. And there was no like new program. Like, we had the pilot money got spent, and then we were like, the problem's not like fixed. We like showed that this can work, but we need to do much more. And so we went back to advocacy. We got some funding to work with a bunch of partners across the city to work with rooming house tenants and write like a whole report on how the city could implement policies and programs that could help to preserve this deeply affordable housing that we have. And one of the things that we recommended was a small sites acquisition program. So taking the pilot and extending it across the city. We had been in Oakland. The first time the Community Land Trust Network informally met was actually in Oakland at the Ground and Solution Conference, which is like the American network. 17 of us went down there and met, and I got exposed to this this group in San Francisco, like some community land trusts there that were using a small sites acquisition program that the city of San Francisco had created. And the city was providing these grants for community land trusts and other nonprofits to buy at-risk rental buildings. And so I asked them like to send me like all the policy documents, and we looked at it and we thought like, how do we convince the city to do that, but in a way that'll work for us? So we wrote this up with like a bunch of groups in Toronto and based on the advice of those groups out in the Bay Area. And the city did it. Yeah. It took like a few years of advocacy, and definitely there were counselors that got behind us, like Gord Perks, Anna Bailau even. Yeah, I mean, I think there was, in Toronto, we were seeing like the rent evictions like really stepping up in a way that it was becoming a major public issue in almost every ward. So there was kind of an interest. And so in, I think it was 2021, the city created MURA, Multi-Unit Residential Acquisition Program. It's I guess one of the city's 3 housing programs, affordable housing programs that are supporting new affordable housing being created. And when I say new, I just mean like it's actually permanently affordable and it's going to be there. I don't mean it's built new, but it funds nonprofits and co-ops as well as the city to purchase buildings of 6 to 60 units that are at risk and to convert them to nonprofit affordable rental. It provides up to $200K a unit plus $25,000 of due diligence grant. It requires that the organizations agree to 99 years of affordability, which is amazing, like the legal limit. It's cool the city's doing that, I have to say. And rents have to be no more than 80% of average market rent on average. And the thing that makes this work is the two-stage process. So even when there is programs, one of the barriers to acquisition is that when a building goes up for sale, you need to put an offer in pretty quick. When you put the offer in, you pay a deposit, and then there's something called the due diligence period. And that's a period where you like inspect the building, you talk to the bank about getting your financing, you get like all the pieces together, and there's a thing called the due diligence date. That's the date where before that date, you can kind of like get out of the deal without losing your deposit. Once you waive your conditions on that due diligence date, you're required to complete the transaction. And so you can be in real trouble if you don't have the money to complete the transaction. Private owners generally don't want to wait more than 30 to 60 days. Usually 60 days is like the max limit, at least in the market we're in, for us to waive conditions. So we have 60 days to inspect the building, analyze all those reports, get financing, and get public money. Like that's not a lot of time, 60 days. I mean, it is 60 days, but you know, getting the city to do anything takes a long time, right? So it's just not possible. So the two-stage process is really important. In the first stage, organizations apply for the program just using their organizational qualifications as the basis. So we can operate housing. This is our governance structure. This is our experience. This is our partner, et cetera. We're prepared to do this. They pre-qualify you for a certain amount of money. So in that pre-qualification stage, you also say, we want enough money to buy 20 units. So 200,000 times 20, whatever that is. And they could approve you for that money, and then you can go and bid on a building. And when you get a deal, then the city will promise to make a decision within 30 days and give you that money. So normally when you apply for public money, it's like a 6 to 8 month, like from application to a decision and payment. But this process allows it to be 30 days. Which allows us to actually do acquisition. And I'm sorry for the like detailed explanation, but it's quite important. It's what makes this work. And I'm almost done. It was a big policy win, I think. In the first years of the program, the program was funded at $10 million a year. Not a lot. City of Toronto, buying buildings, $10 million does not go very far, unfortunately. But nonetheless, I think like each year they added some extra money on top of what they were supposed to. So like in 2.5 years, they spent $46 million, and there were 260 units that were purchased. I don't actually know how many buildings. They don't publish that information, but they put a report recently that they've supported the acquisition of 260 units across the city. That's like pretty great. Those are 260 units that would have been lost. You know, if this didn't happen, that, you know, if all goes well, these will be permanently affordable. Yeah. Yeah. That's not me. That's not just me. That's like across the city. This is what. Yeah. So we were one of the first recipients of the MURA program. We purchased a 36-unit building. They give us $4.5 million to help with this acquisition. It's 36 units in Parkdale. It's next door to the first building we purchased. And this is now permanently affordable rental housing, and tenants have access to RGI, rent geared to income. In the years following that, just recently we heard that Wigwamin, an Indigenous housing organization in Toronto, purchased 2 buildings through MURA. Kensington Market has purchased a building in the market through MURA. And in this the recent mayoral election, Olivia Chow, the first piece of her housing program or housing platform was to increase MURA from 10 million to 100 million. And it hasn't happened yet. But they did put a bunch of reports in recently that are seeking to sort of allocate different new forms of taxation to MURA. So for example, there was a council report, and I don't know what the result was, I don't know if someone saw this, but that the vacancy tax, which we passed last year, and it's the second year of the vacancy tax this year, they put a motion for that revenue to be allocated to this program, which is like, it would be like a permanent revenue source for acquisition, which is very cool. So we're like kind of hopeful that this will happen, and it's really exciting because, of course, we see a lot of public money, municipal money, going to support private developers to build affordable housing that is affordable for 5, 10, 15 years, and then that benefit is lost to the market, and it seems like quite a waste to me. The exciting part about this money going to community land trusts and nonprofits is that we're putting that public investment in a bucket that doesn't have a leak. Like if you're trying to fill a bucket that has leaks all the time, like you're gonna really need to keep putting a lot more water into that bucket. Given that we have like limited resources to invest in affordable housing, it seems to me like we should have some very sealed buckets, like very like amazing buckets. I want the best bucket possible. This is John Davis, one of the grandfathers of community land trusts, who keeps reminding us of this issue. We need to be worried about that leaky bucket, right? And I think that's like the case of community land trust to the city is like, you invest in us and that investment stays forever. We're gonna reinvest that investment in the community. Last thing to say is that we're very concerned about the large-scale rental housing in our community, the towers, and we do think we need to be acquiring them. I hope Tom's gonna talk about that. We did a study that just like was very scary, showed us like how quickly these buildings are becoming unaffordable, being owned by corporations and REITs. Currently, right now, there's a four building portfolio for sale in our community, 250 units being sold by a REIT. We'd love to convert this to affordable housing, but unfortunately there are no programs that will support that, municipally, provincially, or federally. So we're sitting here watching these, buildings just trade hands between these greedy companies. It's quite unfortunate. And so again, like there continues to be like major policy failures that need our attention. We need to keep pressure on the feds, where I think like this amount of money can only come from the feds, I think, to purchase these large rentals. And that's where I hope we can all go. National Housing Acquisition Program. Thanks.
No, we're good? Excellent. So first, I'm just so happy to be here after all the work, and especially on a panel with Josh, whose work we've followed for a good long time. So there's going to be some crossover between the concepts here and some differences, because the acquisition program that I want to talk about isn't a community land trust program. It's a program that the community land trust can tie into and make use of for the purchase of purpose-built rental properties. So I'm with the Co-op Housing Federation of BC. We also have a bit of a group of social enterprises, the Community Land Trust Foundation and Coho Management Services. And for the longest time, the struggle around acquisitions has been a one property at a time grind. And this is the picture you typically see people show you of Vancouver. What's misleading about it, if you follow down to the bottom of the screen, you kept going south from the mountains, you'd see that 85% excuse me, of the land mass of Vancouver is reserved for single detached zoning, which means that 20% of the population occupy 85% of the land. Now, what's that meant in the dense part of downtown, the West End, there over to the west? You see some very older purpose-built rental stock that has been the subject of speculation by pension funds, REITs, and others over the years. So we have a lot more of these than we do of these, and that's causing a dislocation issue and an affordability issue that has really had tragic consequences in our market. This is 115 Place Housing Co-op, which was the old acquisition model. That's when we had to put together financing to buy this co-op from the union pension fund that owned it, which came within a whisker of selling the property to a REIT and doubling or tripling the rents that the co-op members were paying. So that property is now owned by the Community Land Trust on a deal that I think it's fair to say stretched our capacity beyond the limits that it was meant to be stretched. And it became a conversation in the community housing sector around I think, it's fair to say that it's been a blind spot for the community housing sector over the years. We have focused on supply programs, and we have not paid enough attention to the acquisition challenge that's in front of us. I mean, in BC alone, this is the announcement of in January of this year of the Rental Protection Fund that I'm going to talk about as a joint project of the community housing sector. But for the longest time, we've been losing affordable homes at a much more rapid clip than we've been able to build new affordable homes. So imagine like rolling out a rug in front of you and being able to scrape together the funds from the various government programs to allow you to build new affordable housing. And meanwhile, it's rolling up behind you at a rate of 4 times the pace of your new supply programs. We're losing 4 affordable homes in the purpose-built rental stock for every 1 home that was being built under federal or provincial housing programs until the Rental Protection Fund was announced by the provincial government. There's a funny law in BC. It says if the government has any money left over at March 31, the end of its fiscal year, it has to go to pay down the debt. And I can tell you our current Premier, David Eby, did not run to be the debt reduction Premier in BC. So the government scrambled in late 2022, early 2023 to figure out how to invest funds in the community housing sector. And they came to us and said, if we do this through BC Housing, or if we do it through the Ministry of Housing and the government, we won't have the funds available because that money would have had to go to the debt. But we have this surplus. I think in the end the surplus was $6 or $7 billion. They said, what if we gave you $500 million? Would you be able to create a vehicle to receive those funds from us? So we said what we always say to government when we have no idea what we're going to do. We said, of course. That should always be your answer. When government asks you if you can do something to either acquire or build new affordable housing, don't think about whether or not you can. Just say, of course we can, and then figure it out later. So in this case, the BC Nonprofit Housing Association, the Co-op Housing Federation of BC, and the Aboriginal Housing Management Association came together, created an arm's length nonprofit society, the board of which are the 3 CEOs of the associations, and said to government, I think it took us 48 hours to incorporate the thing, and said to the government, we now have a bank account. It's got $5 in it. If you'd like to add 5 zeros to that amount, be our guest. And in April of this year, sure enough, the first tranche of $300 million showed up. The next 200 is coming in a couple of months to start funding the acquisition of purpose-built rental housing by nonprofits and the Community Land Trust to move at least 2,000 rental homes out of the private sector into the community housing sector, whether they be owned by nonprofits or have the opportunity to be converted to co-ops. And this is, again, the loss of affordable homes, and you all know the story, right? REITs, pension funds, institutional investors, they target older, more affordable buildings because the opportunity to renovate, double, triple the rents, deliver double-digit returns to their investors is irresistible in a market where supply will never keep up with need or demand. In fact, there's a really interesting conference that's held every year here in Toronto. They invited the Community Land Trust to it by mistake a couple of times, but it's the the real estate investment conference. And it's 2,000 people packed into the Toronto Convention Center getting tips from consultants and brokers and real estate investors on how to turn an existing housing portfolio into double-digit returns to investors and shareholders. It's fascinating. Doug Ford always shows up for the Q&A, and his message is the same every year. He says, Don't worry, he says, my job is to get out of your way and let you have your way in the market. That's literally his words. So the notion of the Rental Protection Fund is not to use the capital to fund the full purchase price of the building. Because what can a nonprofit or a community land trust do? They can finance real estate acquisitions. The purpose of the fund is to inject enough capital to fill the gap between the financing it will take to maintain the existing affordability in the housing and the full purchase price. So that's really the key. Of course, there's going to be a capital investment as well to make sure that the asset is kept up to speed. But the notion of the fund is really to plug that equity gap so that the nonprofit housing provider or the co-op or community land trust ends up owning the asset outright. There's no leasehold arrangements involved in the deal at all. So it's a very simple three-stage process. This will sound pretty familiar if you were listening to Josh. The first is already underway. There are more than 50 nonprofit housing providers and the community land trust pre-qualified to participate in the program. The second stage is a quick eligibility check. Is the property at risk of redevelopment or dramatic rent increases? Is it privately held? Is it purpose-built rental housing? Check, 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 yes. And on to stage 3, where the underwriters, the banks and the nonprofit, go through the due diligence process that Josh described. Make sure that there's a commitment available from a lender based on a 20-year cash flow, an affordability test, and an appraisal, and then the deals can close. Now we're just the targeted. It's $500 million. So the target is to preserve at least 2,000 homes over the next 18 to 24 months. So that's, if you do the math, it's on average $250K per door. The initial feasibility work that we're seeing come in indicate that we can probably get away with anywhere from $220 to $230K a door. So we'll end up being able to move more than 2,000 homes, probably 2,200 to 2,300 into the sector. And I don't think we need to look at all these slides about the process. But so in combination with the financing that's available for reputable nonprofits with a track record in managing affordable housing assets, we think there's a good chance that we'll hit that 2,300 unit target, and with very minimal intervention by the fund. The notion that we had to wrestle with early on, because nonprofit housing providers and our own community land trust can be pretty skeptical when it comes to groups that are in a position to give them money. So the first question we got was, are you going to be easier to deal with than CMHC or BC Housing? And our answer was, well, if we're not, we better turn the lights out and close the doors right away. So it's meant to be a very light touch, but of course there still is a due diligence aspect to make sure that the asset is now managed in a way that preserves the initial affordability mandate and waits an appropriate period of time until the property is redeveloped, not in the interests of shareholders in a REIT, but in the interests of the existing residents, whether they've converted to a co-op or remained as a private rental property. So the technique will be an option to purchase. The nonprofit simply has to agree to maintain affordability, protect security of tenure of tenants. If the property is going to be sold or redeveloped within a 10-year period, then the fund's permission will be required. And if for any reason at all, we don't expect this to happen, but if for any reason at all there's a breach of those obligations, then the fund will be able to exercise its option to purchase the property, hold it for only the limited amount of time it would take to transfer the title to another qualified nonprofit. The goal of the fund is never to own housing assets, is to facilitate the asset accumulation by existing nonprofits, because if you think about what has really plagued the community housing sector over the years, our Achilles heel is that we're the most disaggregated real estate asset base you can imagine. We've never been able to build up our own assets that can be leveraged to create new homes, acquire existing homes, and redevelop existing properties. And that's one of the goals of this, this program. So the impact, we think, over time will be first and foremost to protect tenants, their security of tenure and their affordability. Between, I think you saw in an earlier slide, between 2016 and 2021, in BC, we lost just over 97,000 rental homes at $1,000 a month or less. This is the most critically affordable housing stock we have. And it was being gobbled up by the usual suspects, the REITs, the pension funds, as second and third generation owners decided they didn't want to be in the rental housing business and looked to unload those assets. The irony, I have to tell you, and we were a bit surprised to discover this, is one of our first sellers is likely to be CapREIT, the largest REIT in the country, because they're looking to reposition some of their asset base from holding existing rental housing to building new supply. So we're going to do a careful examination of that portfolio to see how much of it might be able to be moved into the community housing sector to protect those tenants before the inevitable happens and they get flipped. So protecting tenants, job one. Building the asset base and capacity in the community housing sector, that's a critical piece of the puzzle. It's really, if you think about it, it's a supply program in disguise, because ultimately all of those properties will have to be redeveloped when they get to the end of their useful life, except now they'll be redeveloped by a nonprofit housing provider or a co-op or a community land trust, not by a REIT. So it's a new supply of non-market housing to increase the influence we can have in the market. I know Brenda is here from Burlington. You should ask her what percentage of the Burlington real estate market is owned by the Champlain Housing Trust. When you own a significant chunk of the market, you can influence the market in ways that you can't if you're just nibbling around the edges. And finally, you know, building a stronger non-market housing sector. The reason we're all here, through a community land trust model that can intervene and become a purchaser of those properties, and then offer the residents the opportunity to stay right where they are, convert to a co-op if they choose, is going to be a game changer for us. So we're very pleased to have the partnership of our provincial government in this, and to echo what Josh said, the sooner this can become a national acquisition program, the better, because there are, you know, as I said earlier, the most affordable housing that you can have is the housing you already hold. And that's really the name of the game. So that's it for me.
A question?
When you talk about intervening, are there systems available that make it possible to bid on property before it reaches the market? Like sometimes, you know, purchasing directly from a family, it becomes a nonprofit option. Like, how do we intervene with market purchases in a way that can be bought for lower than market rates for buildings?
I'll reiterate and then tell me if I'm wrong. Are there ways to get below market deals from owners prior to properties coming to market and there being kind of like bidding wars and things like that? Like, are there tools we can use to get ahead of that? Is that okay?
Yeah, that so we were a bit surprised at how it started to shake out. Like right now, the fund has only been open since April. And we've got something like 1,600 homes worth of the 2,000 home target, like in the pipeline, ready to move. And that's because I think the thing we overlooked was there's a whole community of brokers out there, and their job is to find, you know, make that match between buyers and sellers. So they spent predictably the first 48 hours after the program was announced, you know, describing it as you know, creeping communism, a horrible idea to give these flaky nonprofit and co-op people a chance to actually act in the real estate market. And 48 hours later, they started calling and saying, I think we have a property you might be interested in. So those connections are going to be made. A lot of, as I said, a lot of second and third generation rental property owners are deciding they don't want to be landlords, and they're looking to unload those properties. REITs and pension plans are deciding, that they want to reposition some of their portfolios. So we don't anticipate any pipeline issues at all. Those connections are happening through the brokerage community.
Yeah, we used to think that we could get deals, and we'd try to develop relationships with local landlords, convince them that what we were doing could be part of their legacy. But we haven't had success in that, and it turned out to be, really a big waste of our energy and theirs. Our experience is that 99% of landlords want the most they can get from the sale of their property, and so it's much more efficient for us in terms of the use of our energy and time to actually get the appropriate resources to be able to act and to pick the buildings we think are the best investments for our community. Like, we know we're only going to have so many opportunities, so we need to pick the better buildings, and we're finding that we can bring the prices down by actually having the money ready. You can provide a more competitive bid when you're confident you can actually pay that. And when you can show that, then a vendor will be more willing to take a little less, because the less likely that you can actually close the deal, the more they're going to want you to bid. They might take a risk to get more money. My perspective is we just need to be in the position to be putting in aggressive offers, and that's our best bet at getting good deals. And I hate to say it, real estate agents do play a role in this. We tried to negotiate with property owners ourselves for quite a few years. That was one of our mistakes. Government programs were a problem, but also don't do it. I would advise against it. Real estate agents are really kind of like interpreters. They translate our interests and the property owner's interests to each back and forth between, they take that message back and forth and they try to find something that can work for both parties. And it's kind of magic. Our interests are so different, the property owners and the community land trust, that it's very hard to actually bridge that difference ourselves. And we do actually need interpreters or translators, and that's the real estate agent. And in addition, the real estate agents, once the market knows who your real estate agent is, that you're on the market for a certain type of property and you can close on those types of properties, then everyone is reaching out to them. Our agent in Toronto, anyone who's trying to sell a small rental building in the West End is bringing them to him now that he knows that he's supporting nonprofits to buy buildings and they have access to public money. So I think once there's programs and we're buying buildings, the community sector, the market will bring them to us. That's the way the market works. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think what we all overlooked on day one is that the brokers, they get paid no matter who's doing the buying or selling, right? So as soon as they got over their initial surprise that we'd be involved, they started to make those calls and to try and set those deals up. There was a lot of, the initial response from some people in the media was, well, the nonprofits and the community land trust, they don't have enough experience to make the right deal, so what if they get hosed and they overpay? And what they forgot is the deals have to be financed. So underwriters have a real discipline they bring to the table, and they're not going to underwrite a loan that has the buyer overpaying or paying more than the market price for a property.
Is this on? Beautiful. Thank you both. I have a more broad question. It's really interesting that in the BC context, you guys ended up establishing a sectoral coalition around this funding opportunity. And I think BC is unique and interesting in that the Community Land Trust is a province-wide land trust, and it's not necessarily neighborhood-based. Josh, I'm wondering in the Toronto context, if there was a provincial program for Ontario, how do you see that playing out, given that there is fragmentation between neighborhood-specific land trusts, and do you think there could be an opportunity where there is this coalition built across at least the GTA, for example, to be able to position the sector as a whole for acquisition, or do you think there may be fragmentation in that?
I think like we are working collaboratively. The community land trusts in Toronto like speak on a weekly, monthly basis, like between staff and board members. So I think we are in touch. We are having some of those conversations about whether there are opportunities to, join forces in particular moments and contexts. And I think that, as things evolve, we will keep those conversations open. I don't think the driver of that, though, would be like a funding program. The driver of that is more likely to be totally honest, is just like trying to be more efficient with the resources we have and more effective to provide really good services to our communities. Like, like each organization needs its own administrative back office. There's a benefit to be able to hire like really good staff that can do the asset management, that can do certain very technical things, where if we join forces, we may be able to be more successful at doing that efficiently in terms of the minimal resources we have. So I think those are going to be the reasons why we would work together. Those are at least the drivers of the conversations currently. But I don't know about the money piece. Like I feel like the land trusts in our region are operating at a bit of a different scale and have a very different relationship with the province, obviously. So like that's almost like a sci-fi novel or something that we're reading in BC. I think maybe there are other organizations in Ontario that'd be better suited to come together to like facilitate the dispersion of that type of money. Probably wouldn't be us. We're like small players in Ontario. Like the community land trusts are playing a different role than they are in Vancouver and BC. Yeah.
But thanks for noticing that coalition, because I mean the strategic alliance that we call Housing Central, between the Co-op Housing Federation, the BC Nonprofit Housing Association, and the Indigenous Housing Association, predates the announcement of the Rental Protection Fund. But we have, since 2015, been collaborating very closely together to advance the brand of the community housing sector, not just co-ops or nonprofits. And I mean, I can't speak for any other province, but my message to all of my colleagues across the country has been, the longer we stay hunkered down in the silos we've created for ourselves within the community housing sector, the less effective we're going to be in the long haul. I'm absolutely convinced that no one of the partner organizations you saw on the slide could have scored the Rental Protection Fund on its own. It was the alliance among the sector partners that got it done, because government knows, and the media knows now, they can come to any one of us, and any one of us can speak for all of us.
I come from a rural area, and Josh, you've been out there, Prince Edward County. So we've lost a lot of housing to tourism and Airbnbs. Josh is out talking to us. But we're a small municipality, so we'll never have any kind of thing happen where we are relative to financing from our area. So rural communities are often not big enough and don't have scale enough sometimes to do some of the things you've both talked about. But I'm very interested in the provincial work and wondered if any of the work you're doing is outside of Vancouver, or you're just starting with Vancouver because of the issues there.
No, in fact, the very few of the properties that are in that 1,600 home pipeline are in Vancouver, because they're just too expensive. So we have to, the government is very focused on that 2,000 unit target. That's a minimum we have to hit by the time the 500 million is fully deployed. And on an average, dollar per door basis, we are finding we're doing more of our work outside the Lower Mainland. So it's very well suited for rural properties, especially when an established nonprofit with a bit of a track record can assemble, a bit of a scattered portfolio. So we're expecting that to be a significant feature when we come to measure the outcomes of the fund.
Okay, I'm just building on the question I think that was just asked a short time ago. I'm just wondering how we could have this work in Ontario and in other provinces in Canada. I know we don't have the same sort of provincial support maybe or in one province versus another. I'm wondering if we could have like a 3-level of government funding program like this, all 3 levels of government being funded through the municipality and to distribute it. Like, could we have a creative solution like that? And, you know, March 31st comes around, end of year, extra funding. You know, maybe there could be a policy that a certain amount of that allocation could be fund. I mean, I'm just brainstorming here. Or do you have some ideas on how we could, with 3 levels of government, fund in different provinces to retain housing stock and buy from cap REITs and things like that?
I would love to see what you're describing. I know that the housing minister in BC has already been contacted by housing ministers in Manitoba, Quebec, and Nova Scotia to have a very similar conversation. If the levels of government could actually get it together to work more cooperatively together. I mean, the easiest thing for CMHC to do to get its numbers up in BC would be just to dump money into the rental protection fund. But that we haven't seen that kind of creative cooperation before. I know that there's at least one cabinet minister now in BC who's floating the idea of actually making it a statutory obligation of government to put a percentage of every year-end surplus into the fund. That would be a nice first move. But yeah, there's and for to go back to the question about how much is happening in Vancouver, I'd say to a municipality, like, if you want to amplify the impact of a fund like this, and you want to get those average per door numbers down within a range that makes it attractive to buy rental properties in your municipality, then put equity in. To reduce that grant that's required to keep rents where they are and protect security of tenure. That would be the best use of municipal equity in a rental protection fund that I could think of.
We have one last question, then we're going to wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for your patience and for being here for so long. You're awesome.
Thank you both. I was just wondering, for the Mura program and for the pilot program, did they provide, what percentage of funding did they provide for the acquisitions? And if you had to seek other funding, where did you seek it from?
Yeah, so for the pilot project, we received 1.5 million, and it was a 15-unit building, so I think that's 100,000 per door that we received in grant funding, and then we had to take out a $900,000 mortgage from Van City Community Investment Bank. So we generally find that we need about 60% of the money, 50 to 60% of the money in grant, and then the rest we can usually finance from the rents. Of course, the lower you can bring that down in terms of how much you're financing, the better, because it leaves more room for operations. And as maybe you don't know, but I think most of you probably do, but operating and maintaining affordable housing is expensive. And so we do need to have a significant amount left for that. And the more debt service you have, the less money you have to make sure the housing's operating well for the residents. And then, our other projects are maybe like $150,000 of grant, and then a similar amount of financing. And the last thing is that acquisition is much cheaper and economically efficient than new development. At least right now, I think it's at least in our community, it's about $200,000 a unit to $300,000 a unit all in. That's both acquisition and retrofit to be able to do these projects. And when we're looking at the new construction projects that are equivalent, we're looking at like $550, like $500, $550, $600,000 a unit construction cost. So if we're looking at a housing crisis where we need to actually make sure that everyone's getting what they need, it seems to me like we should be making the most efficient decisions as possible in terms of the use of the limited resources we have. Thanks. We have to make space for the panel, but thanks so much.